Well, actually, my first message would be a message of congratulations to Pascal for his third term. And what I told him yesterday was that Spain will be constructively helping him in his third mandate. I will, of course, be contributing to the discussions to this end, basically, that the Eurogroup can be up to the challenge in these very difficult times.
And when we spoke to you last week, you talked about issuing common debt to finance defense in Europe. Do you think this conversation might make any progress soon?
Well, we're already doing it. I mean, we approved the SAFE instrument, which is a joint debt financing for loans for defense investment in the EU, 150 billion. Actually, that was approved during the Polish presidency just a few weeks ago.
So let's talk about trade, because that's the whole conversation going on at the moment. The White House announcing some tariffs on a series of countries, including Japan and South Korea. We understand that the Commission is still in negotiations with the White House to try to lock down a potential framework for a trade deal in the coming days, around 10% tariffs from that new August deadline with some exemptions. Are you confident that the EU will reach a deal with Washington?
Well, I want to be optimistic. There's been progress over the past few weeks along those lines in the negotiation around tariffs and on tariff barriers as well with the U.S. Trade Representative, with Jameson Greer, and between also the Commissioner, Maroš Šefčovič. So I think we're getting there. It's not an easy race. It's not an easy negotiation, as we all know. And I think it's a good sign that we're making progress on that front, but still more to do. Of course, it's always hard to pin down the details and to include all relevant dimensions, including also, of course, negotiations on specific sectors such as the automotive and steel and aluminium as well.
We see some countries making some concessions in order to get a deal through, like Canada dropping their digital services tax. There's some calls for Europe to potentially do the same. Do you think would be a good idea?
Well, I think we need to have a beneficial agreement for both parties. As I've been saying all along, Europe and the US actually now have the greatest economic and trade relationship in the world. On a daily basis, 4.6 billion euros cross the Atlantic in terms of both goods and services trade. So we want to protect that treasure, and therefore we need beneficial agreements to everyone, and that's what we will be trying to do from the EU side, always being constructive, but also understanding that we need to protect the interests of our industries and our consumers as well.
Let's talk about Spain, of course, a bright spot when it comes to the economy in Europe. The rebound of tourism has very much helped that since the pandemic. Around 13% of GDP comes tourism, but there is a crackdown on mass tourism in Spain. A lot of regions have put some special rules on short-term rentals in particular. So how do you not kill the golden goose to a certain extent? How do you try to put some of these measures in place to crack down on mass tourism while not damage your economy?
Well, actually, Spain's growth story is much more than just tourism. When you look at our exports, for example, we're exporting more on non-tourism services than on tourism, which is usually less well known. And when you look at tourism flows as well, we were just discussing before being on there, what's going on in Spain is now most of the increase in tourist inflows is actually in what we call shoulder months, just before or after the summer break. So there's a bit of deconcentration in how these flows are coming to Spain, also geographically. More tourism related to, of course, business tourism, but also rural tourism, also in the north part of Spain. So that's a positive trend, but still we have to deal with the potential trade-offs that 100 million tourists can produce in the use of services in Spain as well, and in terms of the housing sector.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to come to that because that's one of the issues, the housing crisis in Spain. So what is your government doing to address this issue in particular, beyond some of these measures around tourism?
Well, there are measures around tourism, particularly on short-term rentals. What we want is to avoid that there are illegal postings on websites. So there is a regulation going on there, trying to revamp the supply of housing that went, as I said, in a way towards short-term renters that should be there for medium to long-term renters, so more affordable long-term housing. But also we're rebuilding the housing stock, the public housing stock that was completely depleted after the housing crisis. Just to give you an idea of the extent of the shock, the housing sector, construction sector represented around 13% at the height of the construction bubble, of the housing bubble. Now it's around 6%. So really what we know is that there is still scope for an increase in the size of the construction sector, for an increase in investment and a rebuilding of the housing supply, particularly for the public sector, so that we can again instill this push to supply for affordable housing and therefore also reduce prices and increase the availability for households.
One of the other issues that is identified around the Spanish economy, despite its good health, it's its sluggish productivity. So again, I know it's a really difficult one for governments to address, but how are you trying to address this issue in particular?
Actually, there was a very nice graph yesterday in the FT on productivity per hour, where Spain was actually second to the US, and this is thanks particularly to the last few years, where we've been able to do something that we were not in past growth periods, which is make growth, job creation compatible with increases in productivity per hour. And this is somehow also part of the success story of the Spanish growth model, that we are building, modernizing our economy throughout also big investments, particularly coming from Next Generation EU funds. And this is proving to be, again, a good sign for record numbers in terms of job creation that come together with more productivity as well.
And what's interesting when we look at Spain is that economic success is despite a very fragmented political landscape. And some identified it as a potential key issue going forward. And recently there's been some issues with the Sanchez government, some corruption issues with some people close to the party. This weekend, a sexual harassment case. The Prime Minister is announcing some key measures, anti-corruption measures tomorrow in Parliament. This seems to be very complicated. And how many scandals can pile up on Pedro Sanchez before he has to go or before he has to call a snap election?
Well, decisive action has been taken, as you said. More measures will be announced tomorrow by the President. And I think that should not put any shade on the accomplishments that we're doing, that we've been having for the past 7 years, where we've been actually making two elements compatible. On the one hand, growing, but on the other hand, basically gaining new social conquest, new social benefits for our citizens, including, of course, increasing minimum wage, including now the next frontier, which is reducing the number of hours that we'll be working on a weekly basis. So there are elements which I think have been up until now not able to come all together. We've been making them compatible, growing, but for the sake of reducing inequality in Spain, for the sake of actually increasing real purchasing power of households, for the sake of creating jobs, and all these, I think, is what actually is important when you look at the track record for the past 7 years.
One of the ingredients of the success of Spanish economy recently has also been immigration. You've actually opened your doors at a time when a lot of countries are closing them. You've opened your doors, and that's helping your economy. Some people say Germany did that a few years back, and that actually fed the rise of populism in that country. So how do you make the case for opening your doors to immigration and that it's a boost for your economy?
Well, Spain, as you said, has been actually having an inflow of around 500,000 people on a yearly basis, and this has been, of course, instrumental for us to be able to maintain the labor workforce, and this is, again, a key factor for growth going forward and also for the sustainability of our public finances. 70% of our immigration comes from Latin America. It's an easy integration process. We have to keep on working on that integration and making the best out of these immigration flows with the best matching between their, of course, their skills and the job offers that are now available in Spain, so that, again, we maximize that potential, we maximize that productivity, and we take care also of the social angle, of course.
May I ask you about Nextgen EU? Of course, Spain has been the second biggest beneficiary in some of these funds. Almost half has not been executed in terms of grants, and we just have 1 year before this money has to be used. Will you be able, because there's been some criticism against Spain a few years back that the delivery was being slow on distributing that money. Are you confident that you will use that money before the deadline next year?
Well, actually, yesterday we had good news on that front. We got a new disbursement green line from the Commission, so that 70% of the grants will have been disbursed by now, 55 billion euros. So we are country number 1 in terms of grants disbursement. We're still pushing ahead to be able to, as you said, make good use of these almost 80 billion in grants that were allocated to Spain, because this is key, this is instrumental for our growth, for the modernization of our country. So there were two main goals from Nextgen EU funds. So first, to get out of COVID without scars, and then at the same time to be able to have this medium to long-term view to modernize our economy, to increase our productivity, to reduce electricity costs with this huge bet for renewables in Spain. All of this is happening at the same time, and this is thanks to the efficient use of Nextgen funds.
May I ask you about climate change? We know that Spain has been facing a lot of big climate events recently, the floods last year around Valencia. You were in Seville just last week, where it was something like 45 degrees. How do you prepare an economy to deal with these kind of shocks that are just becoming stronger and just more frequent?
Well, there's on the one hand, of course, the element associated with our energy mix, how we are preparing to have security in terms of our energy supply going forward, to have also lower costs, a competitiveness edge out of our bet for renewables. Just to give you a number, the increase in the renewables share in the electricity mix over the past 5-6 years has implied a drop of 40% in wholesale electricity prices. That's also, of course, a key factor driving the income of foreign direct investment in Spain. We're number 5 in the world in terms of greenfield investments between 2018 and 2024. That's by how much Spain is attracting foreign investors. And at the same time, of course, we have to take care of potential disasters, not only with the prevention, but also with an element associated with insurance policies. And we have a specific public system in Spain that actually deals with the reimbursement of the costs associated with natural disasters for firms, for citizens, and this is actually proven to be essential for us to avoid a bigger impact in terms of deficit, but being able to actually channel by now almost 3.6 billion to the economy, to the real economy in Valencia after the floodings of last November.
A very final question, because you mentioned the energy mix in Spain. The question of the blackout, there seems to be not a lot of transparency about what happened. We still don't really understand what was the cause of this, and what the government is saying is what the network operator is contradicting. Why is there not a clear explanation yet about what happened during the blackout? Because it means maybe it could happen again.
Well, there was actually just a few weeks ago a fully fledged report on what happened with specific causes that, there is no one specific or one cause or one origin, which was a multipolar origin that was identified. And we, I think 2 weeks ago, we did put in place measures, as you said, to avoid that this will happen again, taking advantage also of the big penetration of renewables in Spain to have further control on tension events as well. So on this, everything is being taken care of.